we are meeting once again Professor Yofi Tirosh. For those who know something about the Israeli civil rights scene and gender equality struggle, there is no way that you wouldn't know about Professor Yofi Tirosh. There's no way that one can study, engage in, attempt to understand and reason the challenges of gender equality or sex segregation in Israel without the contributions in social media, in the press, printed press, on radio and on television that Professor Tirosh is making. And I'm personally grateful to her, and I know that the gender equality and civil rights community in Israel is grateful to her. She's the vice dean of the law school at Tel Aviv University and the former dean of the Sapir College Law School, and a long-time activist in the civil rights arena with a focus on these issues that involve gender equality. So without further ado, and I urge you to write your questions or comments in the chat, and after Professor Tirosh's presentation, we'll have time for raising questions and getting further insights. And let me just mute you all, and Yofi, if you don't mind, unmute yourself. And the microphone and the stage is yours. No, you didn't unmute yourself.
I did, and then you muted me.
Now,
now I'm here. Okay, so hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Uri, for this generous introduction and for inviting me to speak today. I'm really grateful for your interest, everybody, in what's happening in Israel. This is feeling like a real tectonic time. For me personally, I've been an activist for many years, as Uri mentioned, and like all Israelis, we are kind of seeming to move from one emergency historical moment to the next, but this period has really been unprecedented. That's how it's been feeling, and day and night I've been involved, like many other Israelis and legal academics and other experts in the protest. So let me share my my screen with you to upload my presentation.
And in the meantime, let me just say that as always in recent times, actually from the early on, our co-sponsors for these series are Ruach Hidush, Rabbis and Cantors for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, J-Plan, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, and the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. Some of their leaders are with us today, and the microphone is back to you.
Thank you. So one of the amazing things that has been happening in Israel is there's a lot of civic participation, engagement in unprecedented constancy and involvement and interest. And the logos that you see on the left-hand side of my screen kind of represent it. So my academic home is Tel Aviv University. That's the bottom logo. The one above it with the justice scales is a law professors forum that was started because of the need that we felt as legal academics to explain to the public what is happening and to work to prevent the judicial overhaul. And I'm an active part of this forum. I'm very proud of it. And the top logo right here on the left is of a women's organization called Bonot Alternativa, who you may have seen with their amazing displays of the Handmaid's Tale, which I'll showing a bit, and I've been also active there. As people who are here today, I'm sure you keep track of what's going on in Israel generally, but my focus today and the invitation I received from Uri, to my great satisfaction, was to focus on one angle of the crisis, which is the state of Israeli women and the severe threats, and not only threats that are already happening, taking place, to the amazing achievements of women's rights and women's equality in Israel as we have all known it. A very, very short recap, you know that, but the new government is planning to take over the independence of the judicial system by politicizing judicial appointment. It would limit the ability of the Supreme Court and of other courts to strike down laws, to strike down basic laws, to strike down administrative decisions. This is something that is has already happened a couple of weeks ago with the unreasonableness clause that was passed, that I'm sure you heard about. Other things that are on the table are the override clause. So if the court, miraculously does strike down a piece of legislation, the Knesset takes to itself an authority to tell the court, sorry, you are saying that this legislation is unconstitutional, is something that we're not going to respect. But it's really a more general attack on the idea of the rule of law, with slogans that as people that have been living in the Trump age, like deep state and dethroning a president in the US or a prime minister in Israel with legal means rather than in the elections. So they're already working to really weaken the authority of legal counsels and attorneys in governmental ministries. Much of it really has already changed in the atmosphere of the past 7 months without even needing to go through the legislation. So the feeling is that the country is changing rapidly from an imperfect democracy, which we've always been. Israel is not a perfect democracy, to something that's very, very quickly becoming, I won't say a dictatorship, but a very, very impaired democracy with a lot of disrespect to due process, to civil rights and human rights, to the idea of equality, to minorities, to diversity, to all the things that we hold near and dear, at least in the kind of liberal facets of the country. How did we get here? We have the most religious government that we've ever had in Israel, 2 ultra-Orthodox parties that hold grudge to the Supreme Court for all sorts of historical reasons, and want to deny its ability to strike down laws, mainly in order to continue the wave, how do you say, the right of their men not to serve in the military. They don't want the court to force them to serve under the idea of equality. Notably, especially for tonight's context, these 2 parties are overtly refusing to allow women to be members of the parties and to be elected. This, I feel, is a source of shame to Israeli democracy. This shouldn't have been the case, and you're welcome to ask me more about it in the Q&A phase. Then we have a party that calls itself Religious Zionist. It's kind of stealing the brand. It's an intellectual property breach because not all religious Zionists in Israel are holding the messianic fundamentalist agenda of this party, which is combined with extreme neoliberal Darwinist understanding of economics, no longer any, any hint, if they have it their way, of Israel as a socialist country, as a country that provides some sort of a safety net to the unemployed and to the poor, except when it comes to the base. And so to the settlers and to the ultra-Orthodox, they're already really shamelessly transferring budgets and allocating resources more to these communities than to the general Israeli society, to the Arabs in Israel, to women, etc. And then the linchpin of it all is a prime minister that is under trial for several indictments that involve severe corruptions, at least on the face of it. And he has been doing anything that those other parties want in order to remain in power. Personally, I am in disbelief about how many of these party members, how many Likud members are willing to ignore, shut their eyes and not look to themselves in the mirror. They don't want this judicial overhaul. They're not interested in the direction that the country is going, and they're still collaborating with the destruction of the country for short-term political goals. One thing I forgot to mention, speaking about the Religious Zionist Party, is that a major goal of theirs is to annex the territories, and of course not to annex the territories while giving the Palestinians their equal rights. So to really introduce apartheid in the full sense of the term, and to render Israel an isolated, boycotted country, South African style. And when they do that, I think this would be justified, because you can't annex 2 million people and not give them civil rights as a long-term plan. So this is how the government looks, and who is missing in the picture. There are no heads of parties that are women in this coalition. There are very few women in the top in general. 29 Knesset members out of 120, 36 ministries in Israel, and out of them only 6 female ministers, 3 of which are ministers by name and title and salary, but without any authority. This kind of statistics, when you look at comparisons with the world, we are at the bottom with countries that Israel don't belong to generally, basically underdeveloped countries, banana republics, corrupt countries in Africa and in the Middle East, and in the more struggling parts of South America. Only 4 heads of Knesset committees are women out of 27 Knesset committees. There is only 1 CEO of or Director General of a governmental ministry, and in the one level below, the high-ranking officials, heads of agencies that are women, there is no other way to describe it but beheading. There is a long list of women that are being kicked out, And because this is a religiously dominant government, and they nominate their men, they nominate their men. So they don't nominate just somebody, nepotistically who's from their voters. This somebody is, in all cases of replacement, they replace women by men and not by other women. When you think of Israeli young women, of Israeli girls, when they look up to what they can be when they grow up, there is no role model. They can't hope to feel, yes, I can. I have something to aspire to. Now, the first thing that we need to ask ourselves is, okay, if this judicial overhaul goes through, how will it affect women? Women will be among the first groups to be harmed, and among the groups that will be harmed the most. There are other groups, LGBTQ+, Palestinians, Arab citizens of Israel, the poor, the refugees. But with your permission, I'll focus on women. You people in the crowd in this room, you know Israel and Israeli culture enough to know that it's a country that has prided itself on the ethos of gender equality. We have very advanced laws on gender equality. Some of them are more advanced than in the US. Maternity leave, a better sexual harassment law, many other issues. A long line of protections that the Supreme Court has provided to women on personal status issues, so kind of intervening and narrowing a little bit the monopoly, which is a problematic monopoly of the rabbinical courts on marriage and divorce, restraining the rabbinical institution when it said women can't do this, women can't do that, women can't be on a municipal board that decides on the religious services in a town. The court said, no, you can't, by the name of religion, just say women can't be there, and the court has protected women's participation also in the conduct of religious life. Many cases on employment equality, including in terms of a woman's relationship, not just with her workplace and employer, but also with her union, guarantees of women, single mothers' welfare rights, and many other advanced cases from the Israeli courts that protect women. Now, if the judges become puppets, we will not have the protections of the court to prevent what the government is already saying out loud that it's planning for women. When you read the coalitional agreements, the agreements where the parties decided, what they're going to give to one another in order to become part of one government, it's astonishing to find how many of the demands of the ultra-Orthodox parties of the religious Zionist party concern women. For me, it's not surprising. As a feminist, I know that gender equality is not just yet another issue on the agenda. It's a linchpin. It's something that really is central in designing everything. Society, distributive justice, sense of a voice, dignity, shares in the pie, etc., etc. But really, it's unbelievable, and I'll show you some examples of the coalitional agreements demands in a minute. So, as I mentioned before, women in Israel, to my great satisfaction as an activist and as a feminist, have recognized that they must protest, that they need to have a distinct voice, not just in the general incredible protest of Israel that has been going on for 31 weeks, but also with a distinct message that would raise the consciousness of how our rights are under threat. So some of the, I've already been there. Sorry, I don't know what happened here. It jumped back. I'm in a loop. Okay. Okay, let me try and skip. Let's see. Okay, so, no, we've been there also, right? Yeah, okay. So this is a small example of a contribution that I initiated together with other colleagues we created. Haaretz magazine issued a very scary cover enumerating, kind of listing the horrid legislation that is underway, that is planned under this government. But to my dismay, it did not mention a single item that had to do with women's rights. So together with other colleagues, I initiated an alternative cover. You see it on the left, and then we also did it in English on the right. And you can look at the list. All of this list is well-founded, and you can find it with footnotes in documents that we made in the coalitional agreements. The one thing that's not in the coalitional agreements, but we know it from Hungary and Turkey, etc., is the threat on gender studies programs. And we already see it happening in schools. We have Avi Maoz, a Knesset member that has been in charge on the extracurricular education, working to censor, just like the DeSantis, anything that has to do with gender rights, gender equality, women, censoring library books, etc., etc. So this is kind of astonishing. Okay, what do we see in the coalitional agreements? And some of those items are already drafted in the legislation. Masterpiece cake shop type law. So a law that will recognize a religious autonomy of business owners not to sell or serve people based on their conscience, and that would harm gays, lesbians, trans, etc. But it would also, in the Israeli context, severely harm women. You could be a business owner that would say, you cannot enter my store if you're not dressed, quote unquote, modestly enough, or you need to stand in a separate line, or simply, I'm not going to sell you a Talmud book because I don't believe that women should study the Talmud, and of course, I'm not going to sell you the contraceptive pill if I'm a pharmacist, which is an issue that you're familiar with in North America. Gender segregation, an issue that is near and dear to my heart, and I've been focusing a lot on it in my activism, has been something that was justified until now as part of kind of a necessary evil. So we want to integrate the ultra-Orthodox in the labor market. So let's allow them to pursue academic degrees in different classes, men here and women there. Or we want to be multicultural, we want to be true liberals, so let's permit some shows and concerts or job trainings to be in segregation between men and women. Today, the entire music is different. It's not about multicultural tolerance. It's not about necessity. This is a religious command, and the coalitional agreements agree to expand contexts in the civil society where segregation is legal to anything you can fathom. So it could be buses, which already happens in many buses. It could be children's activities. It could be movie screenings. It could be workplaces. It could even be, I know I sound an alarmist and like I'm imagining things, but this happens in ultra-Orthodox neighborhoods. It could even be separate streets or separate sides of the boardwalk. It could be not showing women's images in public. So we have a plague of vandalizing ads where women's faces or bodies appear, and photoshopping, airbrushing women out of images in the ultra-Orthodox newspapers. And all this is going to be legal, legitimate, and protected under the premises of this very narrow and extreme interpretation of Jewish religion that for me is not Judaism. The government has stopped, has curbed every initiative that was underway, every plan, every reform to protect against violence against women, domestic violence. Israel was underway to join the Istanbul Convention, which is a convention that is aimed to protect against family violence. Budgets are being reallocated to other purposes. And then the rabbinical courts, who until now have a monopoly on marriage and divorce, are going to receive authority to rule on every civil dispute. So not criminal, but a contract dispute, a tort dispute. This is done under the guise of a consent. So both parties have to agree to go to the rabbinical court to be the arbiter in their, in their dispute. But of course, we know that there are many, many instances where the division of power is unequal. So if I'm a kindergarten teacher in the religious, or Haredi community, and my employer is saying, sign your employment contract that if we have a dispute, we're going to the rabbinical court, I don't really have an opportunity to say no. And we already have a lot of evidence that the judges in those courts, unsurprisingly, are not going to be friendly to women's issues, to wrongs against women. So if I'm being fired because I'm pregnant, the rabbinical court is not going to be the one to protect me. They're talking about sending women to jail and giving them fines on being, again, quote unquote, immodest in the Kotel, in the Western Wall. Ben Gvir, the Minister of Police, is going to ease a weapon licensing, explaining that it's in order to have, Jews protect themselves, able to protect themselves, very much like the discussion in the US on gun control. But we have a lot of statistics that indicate that when guns are in the house, more women are dead or really severely wounded. If you have a rabbinical degree, it would be equivalent to a BA degree, to a first degree, in order to receive a position in the civil service. This is not only corrupt and against any common sense and meritocracy. Many of these rabbis are not educated rabbis. They're rabbis that don't speak English and don't know their geography or their math, but also they are only men. So we have another advantage in terms of access to jobs to men. And we already have here incredible decisions and developments. So a month ago, the Civil Service Commissioner instructed that in the job postings for civil service jobs, the pronouns will be only male. Just symbolically, legally it's addressing men and women together, but symbolically we're just going to, Hebrew distinguishes between the male and the female pronouns. So for convenience, quote unquote, it's only going to be a male pronoun. You see in the pictures below the Chief Justice Esther Chayut, or the President of the Supreme Court, more correctly, and the Attorney General Gali Baharav Miara. They and other women at the head of the agencies that govern the rule of law in Israel have been under threats, personally, institutionally, unprecedented attacks. They would invite the Attorney General to meet with the government, and they would spend 2 hours yelling at her and scaring her off. And we are all very, very proud of how women kind of stand there in the front of protecting the rule of law in Israel. I'm seeing that my time is running out, so I will start wrapping things up. Women are at the forefront of the protest. This is Shikma Bressler, a professor in the Weizmann Institute, one of the most familiar faces and a symbol of the protest, but many, many other women are involved in many capacities in the women's Bonot Alternativa initiatives, in forums like this one. Me and my friends have been doing numerous salons. We have been writing position papers. We have been, as Uri said, interviewing, explaining to the public, really doing a lot of education on those issues. A few months ago, I was approached by a man that I didn't know, but since then he became kind of a good friend virtually. We haven't met, but except for once in a demonstration, but we really feel a bond. And he asked me to explain to his fellow reservists, the people that are veterans from the military, about the Kohelet Forum. I'm sure many of you by now heard about the Kohelet Forum, this reactionary, ultra-right-wing think tank that has been funded by American Jewish billionaires, Trump supporters. One of them has just recently removed his support from the Kohelet Forum due to this protest. But he approached me to go on Zoom and explain to them what's wrong with the Kohelet Forum because of my experience with the Kohelet Forum in those issues that pertain to sex equality. So the Kohelet Forum not only wants to dismantle the Supreme Court and give all the authority to the government, it also waged attack on women's ability to complain about their victimhood or their offenses. So the Kohelet Forum issues reports on the plague of false complaints of women on sexual assaults, or the too high alimonies that women get in rabbinical courts, and in almost every court case that has to do with the legality of sex segregation, the Kohelet Forum was in the room, either as a party to the case or as a party that submitted a amicus curiae, a friend of the court brief. And so this is to say that it's not accidental that we're there. The threat that we feel is a real fact. These are some of the signs, kind of to give you an idea of what's going on in the streets. This one is to end with a humorous tone. It's a sign that I like, especially. It's kind of, for me, kind of a Generation Z or something, a sign. There is a lot more to say, and I haven't spoken at all about the reasonableness and what's going on now in the Supreme Court. I wanted to focus on women, but you're welcome to ask me on anything more generally. So I'll stop the share, and I really appreciate your attention. Let me also just for a second, stop the noise of the alerts of my WhatsApp on my computer. I'm sorry about that it was bugging us. Okay.
Well, so I urge you, if you do have questions, write them on the chat. I have to say that I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't questions, because Yofi, your presentation has been so clear. And we have heard before about the judicial upheaval. A couple of weeks ago, we had Professor Rivka Weil speak, and before that we had Susie Navot, and we've been dealing with a larger question. But you have really been helping us to zoom in on an aspect that is not often discussed and not quite understood, especially among our friends in North America or beyond. And I have to compliment you also on the sleek and the static presentation, the PowerPoint presentation. It's really been just appealing.
Thank you. I'll just say it's Canva, it's not PowerPoint, but thank you very much.
It's wonderful. All right, let's see what we have. Judge Peter Buxbaum is saying the reasonableness law will have an enormous effect on women. Don't you agree, since government can be as arbitrary as it wishes? So specifically, how do you see the connection between rulings in the past regarding gender equality and the use of the reasonableness doctrine in order to establish that equality?
Absolutely. For me, reasonableness is one of those terms. You know, the right wing, the coalition, is arguing that it's too open a term, that it has it gives the court too much discretion, and that we need certainty. I am not familiar of any legal system, including Jewish law, that does not have some open-ended concepts, some valves where the realization of every creator of a rule of a system of rules is that you cannot predict every factual, set and every question that comes in front of you. You cannot have a legal system that has answers to every single question in advance. So that's where you have terms like reasonableness, like bona fide, like proportionality, etc., etc. With reasonableness, especially for me, it's a sociological term. It's a term that changes according to geography and according to culture and according to society. And when this government attacks reasonableness, for me, it attacks any sense of solidarity or of cohesion that has remained in Israeli society. In November of 2022, we were already a very polarized society, unfortunately. But the polarization today is, exponentially bigger. And when they say that a judge can't say, look, you are simply mad, you're simply unreasonable, this is not how we do things here. What they're doing is they say there's no we anymore. And to be more concrete, I know I've given a little bit of a kind of a legal philosophy answer rather than a concrete answer. But yes, tomorrow there'll be a transfer of budgets. They will shut down all the few women's shelters or the rape crisis centers budgets that we have, and they will transfer them to groups that would teach women the Torah or how to be a modest woman, okay? A good wife. The court won't be able to say anything about it. They will introduce, like one of the examples in the chat, rules that say, you, Professor Tirosh, as an employee in a public institution, must respect everybody and come to work with a skirt and long sleeves. There will be no way to undo this. Now, in a way, and this is something that I want to say kind of more, again, I'm going zooming out to the general state of the protest that we're at. One of the most incredible things that has been happening in the past few months is that many Israelis have become legal scholars. All of a sudden, they know about the composition of the Judicial Nomination Committee, and they know about the difference between laws and basic laws, etc., etc. And we also succeeded in explaining to them the importance of reasonableness. But to be honest, if we're real, had the government stopped at reasonableness, and tomorrow morning they would say, okay, enough is enough. We understand that we don't have the support, the political conditions to continue with the judicial overhaul. Israel would still have remained a democracy. Judges would find other concepts in which they can strike down unreasonable laws or policies, and the sky will not fall. The problem is that the government is saying every day that it has no intention to stop its plan to change the the checks and balances in the structure of the Israeli regime. The government is saying we are after the destruction of democracy, and that is the real worry here. Uri, I want to say another thing, if I have a minute before the next question. I want to say something that will sound ungraceful. Okay, I want to complain a little bit. And I want to say that although there is I don't want to use the Trump language, but the bad guys, like the Darth Vader of the situation today is the coalition, okay? But there are, I'm also critical and disappointed and worried by the opposition and by some of the way in which the protest and the liberal side is moving along, in the sense that there is not enough commitment to protect women's equality and LGBTQ plus equality. What do I mean by that? I gave you an example. My newspaper, Haaretz, the equivalent of the New York Times, has a cover with all the laws and does not mention women. Another example, when we had the negotiations over months and months and months under the auspices of Herzog, the president of Israel, there were every 2-3 weeks there was another outline a compromise formula that would take us out of the crisis. And if we could only agree that, on this formula, then everything will be okay. The coalition rejected every formula. So that's it's not about which formula would have worked and which formula wouldn't have worked. But the unbelievable fact is that in all those teams that suggested those formulas, there was not a single woman. It was all, I can't even remember all the names, but this law professor and this ex-politician, and they're together and they're coming. The men are coming to save the day. Two more complaints. Okay, one is that the leaks that we did receive from the negotiations in the president's home all indicated consistently that the compromises that the opposition is willing to make are going to be about the balance between religion and state, meaning they're going to be on the backs of women. The compromise, if there have been compromise, would have made concessions on women's liberty in the public sphere, on segregation, on rabbinical courts, on all those issues. Finally, I'll stop the final. I'll make my answer a little shorter to allow time for more questions.
Let me just add that you mentioned Kohelet Forum, and I'll say a word about the opposition as well. But Kohelet Forum presents itself in writing as advancing liberal society, open and liberal society.
Yes.
Not surprisingly, the one area which they have not addressed and not spoken of, and one cannot conceive of a liberal society without it, is religious freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And the irony, of course, is, as Professor Tirosh said, this is an arch-right think tank, and they have chosen to advance aspects that would undermine Israeli democracy, as most Israelis, forget about what Professor Tirosh or I think, but most Israelis think, because most Israelis oppose the reform or the overhaul that is proposed. But the one specific area in which a liberal society is tested is an area on which they prefer to keep completely silent and not utter a word of criticism of the government policies. And Professor Tirosh mentioned the refusal of the Haredi parties to allow women into their ranks, and let alone as Knesset members, etc. A word about the opposition, and in a way really agreeing with and adding a dimension to what Professor Tirosh was saying. You've been following the events in Israel for quite a while. I mean, the audience and those who would be watching and listening to the recording. The interesting, unique aspect about this protest is that it is practically separate from the political opposition. The protest movements are independent, are assertive, are determined, and the opposition parties, for the most part, too often continue behaving as politicians. So it's interesting, and I think I'm agreeing with Professor Tirosh that one of the areas of importance of the protest movement is that they are keeping the opposition honest. And I think that they have not been able to control the way that the opposition leadership has acted. And Professor Tirosh mentioned the efforts to pursue some kind of a compromise, and if only you give us more time, we can reach a compromise, etc., etc. I think that's an area that I stressed in the previous webinar with Professor Weil, and I'm saying that again. The important thing for all of us, and there was a question that was posed in a second, we'll get to it, but the important thing for all of us to understand is that the aim of the protest at this point is not just about bring us back to yesterday. If only you bring us back to yesterday, it's paradise. No, it wasn't paradise. And at this point, I think that there is sufficient constructive and positive energy to bring about, probably not, and I have to be open and honest about it, probably not resolve the occupation or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. That is not in the cards. But certainly what Professor Tirosh was saying, LGBTQ, gender equality, religious freedom, all of these are elements that I don't think that the opposition parties consider to be particularly high on their agenda, and are definitely high on the agenda of the public and the protest movements. And the last point is, with the reasonableness clause or doctrine, what is the claim of the proponents of the judicial overhaul? They say, who made you authorized, knowledgeable about what's reasonable and what is not? We are as reasonable as you are, say the politicians to the justices. And this is not a time for a lecture, obviously, and Professor Weil focused on the reasonableness doctrine. But the point is, the public that the current government speaks in the name of, claiming to have this majority of 64 out of the 120. This is a fictitious presentation or misrepresentation of the concept of majority. Yes, they have the votes. No, they do not speak for the people, and they do not have the majority of the will of the public. And one of the things that we have been pointing out, and soon on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, we'll be publishing our annual Religion and State Index, and we'll once again publish the exact data. But when we compare public trust in the Supreme Court, the government, the Knesset, and the Chief Rabbinate, what we see is that there is no comparison. There is approximately 3 to 4 times more trust that the sample, the representative sample of the adult Jewish population in Israel expresses in the Supreme Court than in the Knesset. So there is no question about, if you ask the people, and every poll that was done showed that every aspect of the judicial overhaul is rejected by the majority of the public. But on this reasonableness doctrine, clearly the majority of the public, or I should rather say 3 times to 4 times more among the public, see the court as deserving its trust, as expressing what's reasonable and what's not, than the politicians at the Knesset. All right.
Can I add something to what you said? So I absolutely agree that there is an immense potential and a need to rewrite the Israeli contract. Many Israelis have woken up and they see what's going on, and the arrangements that have been kind of distorted but felt good enough that they could live with them before, like 6 months ago. Now they're like fed up. No, we won't have the ultra-Orthodox tell us that, they protect the country by not risking their lives, but just studying Torah. It's unreasonable. We won't have it anymore. We won't have, as you say, a monopoly of rabbinical courts on marriage and divorce. And I also think, unlike you, Uri, if I can, express a slight difference with the occupation, I see also a potential to change, and it's the courtesy of the chutzpah of the government. So they are doing everything to remind the Israeli public on a daily basis that they're not going to put any constraints on settler violence, that they're not going to protect soldiers internationally because, you know, that they're going to waive soldiers of their criminal responsibility in Israel if they do something illegal. Hence those soldiers, and this is why the pilots are refusing now. They know that they won't be able to fly to London for a holiday because they would be put on trial for international war crimes. And they're transferring state budgets to the territories. We, as an Israeli public, have heard the word occupation in the past 7 months more than we've heard it in the past 30 years. It's really out there. It's here. It's no longer to be ignored. And that's why I'm a little bit optimistic on that as well. I know I sound like a dreamer, but that, you know, it's okay. On the other hand, we need to understand there is a real risk to start a process of some kind of constitutional body, you know, like a federalist, constitutional body that would draft the constitution today, because it could result in a document that neither you nor I would be able to live with, in terms of the concessions on basic rights and on equality. So there's huge potential, but there's also huge risks. The debates we have among the law professors, you know, half of the people say, yes, now, this is the time and we can't go back, just like you said. And then another half said, don't you dare. You know, we have to change things incrementally by the political process.
Now, I see that you kept busy while I was talking. And
yes, I'm a multitasker.
But the disadvantage of that is that those who watch the recording
they won't see either
the question or the answer. So there is a question that Deborah Glazer posted. But she posted it to me, meant it for the group. When is the next election, and what is the likelihood now that this coalition will be thrown out? If saner heads prevail, will they be able to undo the bad laws that might be enacted between now and then? So maybe you answered some political questions. Do you want to make an observation about what you see happening politically, and even without a crystal ball, as to when exactly the next elections are going to take place?
I am very worried that even without the judicial overhaul, the rules of the game are going to be changed such that there will never be a non-right-wing religious coalition again in Israel. I'll give you one example. It doesn't take any legislation. In the past 3 years, we've had 5 election rounds, right? National election rounds. In each and every election round, the Likud asked the election committee, we have a committee that monitors, you know, the procedure of elections. It asked the committee to post cameras in Arab villages and cities ballots, okay? Why did it want to post cameras? The argument was, with straight face, that it's to prevent fraud, right? Distortion in the vote count in the process. But what they really wanted to do is to intimidate Arabs and prevent them from coming to vote. The elections committee that is headed by a Supreme Court justice refused every election. It refused, said, no. What did they do now? They already did it. It's already a law. They replaced the head of the election committee. It's no longer a Supreme Court justice. It's somebody lower ranked. In the next elections, if they only do that, if they only introduce cameras in the ballots in Arab towns, there won't be a left or a change coalition like we saw last time. They are talking about striking down the ability of traitor, terrorist, whatever parties from competing, from running in the elections. They want to strike down the Arab parties. And without the Arab parties, we don't have 51%. There's no chance that we'll have 51%. They have tried to push back the next election date. So it's not 4 years, it was going to be 5 years with some skewed, distorted interpretation. So they're doing everything shamelessly to change the rules of the game. Right now, at this point, because they're so unrestrained, I don't see any hope for keeping things, going in the procedures that we know, changing this law, protecting that law, they're going to protest, etc. Because they are lacking any boundaries, I feel like there is no other way but to find ways to what's the word, to להפיל את הממשלה, to dethrone,
Topple. Yeah.
Sorry?
Topple.
Yeah, so we must go to another election, because every week that they're in power, the damages are beyond imagination.
Mark asked you, and you responded regarding the impact of the protests on the elections. So I want to share with those who are not regularly following the polls and the news from Israel. Practically every other day there is a poll, there is an election poll that's commissioned by one of the main media channels. All of them, without exception, are pointing to the fact that if elections were held today, yesterday, last week, the week before, instead of 64 majority, the current partners in the coalition would get somewhere between 52 and 55. And the previous coalition partners would have a majority of 62 to 64, even without the Balad Arab list. So the question is, of course, will that last until elections? And when will elections be held? That's a tough question. But what is clear is that whereas many thought that the Knesset recess and the hot summer and the heat and the sweat and the vacations, etc., would somehow pull the wind out of the body of the protest movement, actually the opposite has happened. This is a remarkable, unprecedented phenomenon in Israeli history. People are constructively angry. And it's important to understand they're constructively angry. And therefore, I think that there is a silver lining in all of that. And that is that in all likelihood, and on October 31st, there'll be what is to some extent the equivalent of your midterm elections. There'll be municipal elections throughout the country. Those elections are in all likelihood going to herald a transformation, a wave of what do you call it? A storm. And this will be a tremendous indicator for those that asked about what's going to happen in the next elections. It'll be a tremendous indicator as to where the heart and the mind and the concern of the public is. All right. Yofi, any last words? I was asked whether the recording will be available and whether it could be used in synagogues and other groups. By all means, in just a few days, we'll be posting the webinar. We recommend that you view both this one and the previous one, so you have sort of both angles covered. But you are not only welcome to use it, you are encouraged to use it. And the important message to take, as far as I'm concerned, the important message to take with you is American Jewish leadership has to come down from the fence. It's
Absolutely.
not enough to say, heed to the president, come under his tent, talk to each other, be nice to each other. That's just not where we are.
Absolutely, and I know I've spent many years in the U.S. I'm in September. I'm coming back to my alma mater in the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. If you're in the neighborhood, I'm giving some talks there. I'd love to meet you and also do something in Sukkot in NYU in the Taub Center, so we can meet in person if you're in the NYU vicinity. But really, I am the first person to appreciate the immense commitment of protecting Israel for many, many years, even when it gave you a real difficulty and a source of embarrassment. But you felt rightfully that you can't be critical outside, kind of washing the dirty laundry with the general world. But this is a different time. The time now is to realize that if you're not critical of Israel, there won't be Israel left to defend. And on a technical issue, Uri, you asked me to kind of close. So I, like many Israelis, I dwell in WhatsApp. That's where I live. The process is happening in WhatsApp. That's how we connect. And I have a kind of a broadcast list for my updates in English. If I have some content in Israel in English, an op-ed or other things, if you want to join this broadcast list, please WhatsApp me. I put it in the chat, my phone number, and just write your name down, and I'll add you happily to my contact and my content that I send occasionally. Thank you so much for your interest.
If you have any difficulty contacting Professor Tirosh, write me, and I'll be glad to serve as a shadchan. Thank you, Professor Tirosh.
Thank you very much, folks.
An enlightening presentation, and I'm sure it filled, I shouldn't say voids, but corridors that have been sort of in the dark when people were trying to figure out what is happening in Israel. The gender equality angle is so important. And you have done an amazing job in briefing us on it. So thank you. Good luck.
Bye.
Shalom. Bye. Soon we'll announce the next webinar and specific ideas and plans as to how to come down from the fence and engage in constructive change. So shalom and todah.